The Middle East found itself plunged into an unprecedented new phase of conflict this Sunday, June 22, 2025, as the United States directly inserted itself into Israel's ongoing 9-day war with Iran. In a dramatic overnight operation, U.S. forces launched extensive strikes against 3 key Iranian nuclear facilities, a move President Donald Trump declared had completely and fully obliterated Tehran's nuclear ambitions, while simultaneously raising alarms globally about a rapidly escalating regional conflagration. The coordinated American assault, dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, targeted the Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear sites. Pentagon officials detailed an immense military undertaking, describing it as the largest B-2 operational strike in U.S. history, involving over 125 military aircraft and deploying more than 75 weapons. Specifically, B-2 stealth bombers delivered the formidable GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator, often referred to as a bunker-buster bomb. On Fordo, a facility notoriously built deep into a mountain, U.S. submarines simultaneously launched approximately 30 Tomahawk missiles at Isfahan, while Natanz also faced significant bombardment. Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane noted the mission's success in maintaining surprise, with no Iranian fighter jets scrambled or surface-to-air missile systems detecting the U.S. aircraft. Addressing the nation from the White House, President Trump asserted the complete and total obliteration of the targeted sites, though independent damage assessments were not immediately available. He issued a stark warning to Tehran, stating that any retaliation against U.S. forces would be met with even greater force and that future attacks would be far greater and a lot easier. Trump's social media posts echoed this sentiment, proclaiming an historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world, and urging Iran to end this war. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu swiftly praised Trump's decision, hailing it as a bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities that would change history. However, Iran's reaction was swift and defiant. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi warned that the U.S. attacks will have everlasting consequences and that Tehran reserves all options to retaliate, emphasizing that Iran had done nothing wrong and was being attacked for a false accusation of seeking nuclear weapons. The Iranian Atomic Energy Organization confirmed attacks on its Fordo, Isfahan, and Natanz sites, but insisted that its work would not be stopped, reporting no signs of radioactive contamination or danger to nearby residents. An Iranian MP, Manan Reisai, directly disputed Trump's claims, stating that the Fordo facility had not sustained serious damage, with most of what was hit was above ground and is restorable. Iran's ambassador to the United Nations, Amir Saeed Iravani, called for an emergency Security Council meeting to discuss what he described as the U.S.'s heinous attacks and illegal use of force, and demanded accountability under international law. The international community reacted with grave concern. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres expressed deep alarm over the dangerous escalation, warning of a growing risk that this conflict could rapidly get out of control, with catastrophic consequences for civilians, the region, and the world. Russia strongly condemned the strikes, with its foreign ministry stating that a dangerous escalation has begun and calling the decision a gross violation of international law. The International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA) Director General Rafael Grossi announced an emergency meeting of the agency's Board of Governors to discuss the urgent situation. Though the IAEA also confirmed that Iranian regulatory authorities reported no increase in off-site radiation levels at the targeted locations. The decision for direct U.S. military intervention marks a significant shift in the conflict. For over a week, Israel had been engaged in its own campaign to systematically degrade Iran's air defense's offensive missile capabilities and nuclear enrichment facilities. However, U.S. and Israeli officials concluded that American stealth bombers and the GBU-57, which only the U.S. possesses, offered the best chance of destroying heavily fortified deep underground sites critical to Iran's nuclear program. This intervention comes after months of diplomatic efforts by the Trump administration to persuade Tehran to curb its nuclear ambitions, efforts that ultimately failed, leading Trump to abandon his initial hopes for a second chance at a deal. The 2015 nuclear agreement JCPOA, from which Trump withdrew the U.S. in 2018. had sought to limit Iran's enrichment in exchange for sanctions relief, but Trump had decried it for not addressing Iran's non-nuclear malign behavior. The immediate aftermath saw heightened tensions and fears of retaliation. Iran launched a missile barrage into Israel early Sunday, causing damage and injuries in Tel Aviv, while Iranian-backed Houthi rebels in Yemen vowed to resume attacks on U.S. vessels in the Red Sea. Within the U.S., the legality of the strikes was questioned by some lawmakers, with Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat, New York, stating no president should be allowed to unilaterally march this nation into something as consequential as war. The Trump administration is bracing for potential retaliation, with the next 48 hours considered particularly critical. The conflict has already taken a heavy toll, with Israeli strikes on Iran reportedly killing at least 865 people and wounding 396, including civilians and security personnel, while 24 Israelis have died from Iranian retaliatory strikes. Iranian residents expressed shock and fear, with many lamenting the shattered sense of calm and the prospect of a wider war. As the dust settles, the full extent of the damage to Iran's nuclear program remains uncertain, with conflicting reports from U.S. and Iranian sources. Satellite imagery analyzed by the Associated Press suggested some damage to the Fordo facility with smoke visible, but the extent was unclear. The long-term implications of this direct U.S. military involvement are profound. The immediate focus will be on whether Iran's promised retaliation materializes in a form that triggers further escalation, potentially drawing more regional and global powers into the fray. The prospect of a full-scale war looms large, challenging the stability of the Middle East and raising critical questions about the future of nuclear non-proliferation efforts and international diplomacy in an increasingly volatile world. In a dramatic turn of events that sent shockwaves through both geopolitical and digital spheres, President Donald Trump announced on Saturday evening that the United States had launched a very successful attack on Iran's key nuclear facilities. The unprecedented revelation, made via his social media platform Truth Social, was swiftly followed by a global outage of the very platform used to disseminate this critical national security information, highlighting the complex interplay between high-stakes diplomacy and fragile digital infrastructure. At approximately 7:46 p.m. Eastern Time on Saturday, June 21, 2025, President Trump took to Truth Social to declare that U.S. forces had waged a very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. He further claimed that a full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordo, and that all planes are safely on their way home. This initial post was quickly followed by a terse update stating Fordo is gone, and a subsequent address to the nation where he asserted Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. The president emphasized that the objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat, hailing the strikes as a spectacular military success and urging Iran to now agree to end this war, while also warning of far greater future attacks if peace did not come quickly. Within minutes of these seismic announcements, Truth Social, owned by Trump Media and Technology Group (TMTG), began experiencing widespread outages. Users attempting to access the platform reported error messages such as "network failed" and "not found," particularly when trying to view President Trump's account at Real Donald Trump. Downdetector, a crowdsourcing website for service outages, recorded a significant spike in reports around 8 p.m. Eastern Time, while NetBlocks, an organization monitoring internet accessibility, confirmed international outages for many users, clarifying that the incident was not related to country-level internet disruptions or filtering. The sudden inaccessibility of the platform, valued at over $2 billion for Trump's stake in TMTG, raised immediate questions about the reliability of a social media site as a primary conduit for presidential statements on military operations. While no official explanation for the disruption was immediately provided by TMTG or federal cybersecurity agencies, the timing strongly suggests that a surge in traffic following such a momentous announcement likely overwhelmed the platform's servers or exposed underlying technical vulnerabilities. The U.S. strikes on Fordo and Natanz were subsequently confirmed by anonymous U.S. and Iranian officials speaking to the New York Times, though the full extent of the damage to the targets remained unconfirmed hours after Trump's initial posts. This military action marks a significant escalation in the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran, which had seen Israel conducting its own strikes on Iranian targets for over a week, including an attack on 3 Iranian F-14 fighter jets on Saturday. Notably, while Israel had previously attacked Natanz, the heavily fortified and underground Fordo facility was considered a near-impossible aerial target for Israeli forces alone. The U.S. reportedly moved B-2 bombers capable of deploying the 30,000-pound GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator designed for deep underground targets across the Pacific to Guam earlier in the day, indicating meticulous preparation for this operation. President Trump's decision to launch these strikes and to announce them through Truth Social follows a period of complex rhetoric. Just months prior, his Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had testified to Congress that American intelligence continues to assess that Iran is not building a nuclear weapon. Despite this, the administration had been signaling a potential shift, with Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stating just days earlier that a decision on attacking Iran would be made within 2 weeks. This latest action represents a dramatic departure from Trump's prior attempts to negotiate a nuclear agreement with Iran after withdrawing from the 2015 Iran nuclear deal during his first term. His campaign pledges for the Middle East return to real peace and to stop the chaos now stand in stark contrast to the direct military intervention. The incident underscores a growing concern about the stability and suitability of privately owned social media platforms, particularly those with direct ties to political figures, for disseminating critical government information. The crash of Truth Social meant that a major national security announcement was made on a failing system, potentially limiting public access to official statements during a moment of global tension. It also highlights the inherent risks when a platform, which recently encouraged users via email to follow President Trump as an essential resource for navigating world affairs today, proves incapable of handling the very traffic it seeks to attract for such high-stakes communications. As the dust settles from this weekend's events, the implications are far-reaching. Geopolitically, the strikes represent a profound escalation, with the U.S. now directly involved in the Israel-Iran conflict and the future of Iran's nuclear program thrown into immediate uncertainty. President Trump's time for peace declaration, juxtaposed with overt threats of further attacks, sets a volatile stage for diplomatic efforts. Technologically, the Truth Social outage serves as a stark reminder of the vulnerabilities inherent in centralized digital platforms, especially when tasked with bearing the weight of global attention during a crisis. The coming days will undoubtedly reveal the full extent of the military impact, the diplomatic fallout, and whether social media platforms can truly serve as reliable conduits for the most sensitive of state communications. The geopolitical landscape has been dramatically reshaped this weekend as the United States launched a series of military strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities, with President Donald Trump declaring the program obliterated and the action a spectacular military success. This swift escalation has plunged the Middle East into a new phase of uncertainty, simultaneously igniting a fierce constitutional debate within Washington and drawing sharp criticism from a surprising array of voices across the political spectrum. The decision to strike came after a period of intense deliberation, with the White House initially signaling a 2-week window for diplomacy, suggesting a substantial chance of negotiations with Iran. However, this diplomatic overture appears to have been short-lived. Sources close to the administration reveal that President Trump had already approved a plan for an attack on an Iranian nuclear facility even before a crucial lunch meeting with former strategist and MAGA podcaster Steve Bannon. While a White House official later insisted that Trump had already decided against a strike by the time he met Bannon, Bannon himself reportedly urged caution, questioning the reliability of Israeli intelligence and the efficacy of bunker-buster bombs, alongside the unclear risk to the 2,500 U.S. troops stationed in Iraq should Iran retaliate. Concurrently, multiple B-2 stealth bombers were observed heading towards Guam, a strategic move interpreted by many as a show of force or preparation for further action, though official orders beyond transit were not disclosed. adding to the complexity. The administration's actions have exposed a striking rift within its own intelligence apparatus. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard had previously testified that the intelligence community continued to assess Iran is not building a nuclear weapon and Supreme Leader Khamenei has not authorized the nuclear weapons program that he suspended in 2003. Yet in a stark public rebuke, President Trump flatly stated that both Gabbard and the intelligence community were wrong. Senator Jack Reed, a ranking member of the Senate Armed Services Committee, condemned Trump's dismissal of his own intelligence chief as shocking, suggesting it was a matter of political positioning regardless of the intelligence. Reed further questioned the timing, noting the sudden conclusion that Gabbard was totally wrong only emerged after activity by the Israelis. This military action has not only strained international relations but also ignited a significant constitutional crisis at home. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle have swiftly questioned the legality of the strikes, arguing that President Trump acted without congressional authorization. Representative Warren Davidson, a Republican from Ohio who generally aligns with the president, stated on X, "While President Trump's decision may prove just, it's hard to conceive a rationale that's constitutional." Similarly, Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican who co-authored a bipartisan resolution to block U.S. military action against Iran without explicit congressional approval, declared the move not constitutional. The Democratic response has been even more forceful, with some calling for impeachment. Senator Bernie Sanders, speaking in Tulsa, Oklahoma, labeled Trump's actions grossly unconstitutional, asserting, "The only entity that can take this country to war is the U.S. Congress. The president does not have the right." Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez echoed this sentiment, stating that the move was absolutely and clearly grounds for impeachment and a grave violation of the Constitution and congressional war powers that impulsively risk launching a war that may ensnare us for generations. House Minority Whip Katherine Clark was equally direct, emphasizing that the power to declare war resides solely with Congress. Donald Trump's unilateral decision to attack Iran is unauthorized and unconstitutional. Democratic leaders, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, have thrown their weight behind a resolution requiring congressional approval for military action in Iran, urging immediate consideration. Despite the bipartisan condemnation regarding the constitutional basis, Republican leadership has largely stood by the president. House Speaker Mike Johnson defended the strikes as necessary, limited, and targeted, asserting that the president fully respects the Article 1 power of Congress and that the action follows the history and tradition of similar military actions under presidents of both parties. Senate Majority Leader John Thune also offered support, indicating that the president may have sufficient political cover from the Republican-controlled Congress. However, some, like Representative Ro Khanna, believe the strikes could represent the first true crack in the MAGA base, recalling Trump's 2016 primary success partly stemmed from his criticism of the Iraq War. Amidst these high-stakes foreign policy developments, the administration also grappled with domestic political tensions. Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to Los Angeles highlighted ongoing friction over immigration policies and law enforcement. Vance accused California Governor Gavin Newsom and Mayor Karen Bass of encouraging violent protesters and endangering law enforcement by maintaining Los Angeles as a sanctuary city. He asserted that by doing so, they had basically said that it is open season on federal law enforcement, a stance he linked to the president's forceful response to what he termed violent rioters. During his remarks, Vance notably misidentified Senator Alex Padilla as Jose Padilla, dismissing the recent handcuffing of Democratic lawmakers, including Padilla, as pure political theater. The confluence of a major military strike, a public intelligence dispute, a constitutional showdown, and persistent domestic political friction paints a vivid picture of an administration navigating complex and volatile terrain. As the dust settles from the strikes on Iran, the immediate future will likely see continued debate over presidential war powers, potential retaliatory actions in the Middle East, and the enduring impact of these decisions on the upcoming political landscape, both domestically and internationally.
The coming weeks will undoubtedly test the resilience of alliances, the boundaries of executive authority,
and the unity of political factions within the United States. The political and economic landscape of the United States finds itself in a precarious state this June as President Donald Trump's second term navigates a confluence of domestic discontent, escalating trade tensions, and a newly ignited geopolitical flashpoint in the Middle East. With just 153 days into his term, the president's net approval rating has plummeted to -12%, marking a 3.3-point drop from last week, according to the latest YouGov polling tracked by The Economist. This figure reflects 41% approval against a stark 53% disapproval, with 5% undecided, painting a picture of widespread public dissatisfaction that mirrors the challenging start to his first term. This decline is deeply intertwined with the administration's recent policy decisions, particularly the calamitous trade war initiated in April and a renewed focus on mass deportations. The latter, specifically efforts by Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) to target undocumented immigrants in major Democratic-run cities, has sparked widespread protests. While Americans generally express skepticism towards immigration, the polling data suggests a strong disapproval of Mr. Trump's heavy-handed response. His re-election was largely predicated on promises of economic revitalization. Incomes will skyrocket, inflation will vanish completely, jobs will come roaring back, and the middle class will prosper like never ever before. Yet public ratings of his handling of the economy and inflation, initially net positive, have since fallen to strongly negative in the wake of his trade war declarations and the ensuing investor response. YouGov data further indicates that Americans now disapprove of his handling of immigration, a cornerstone issue of his campaign. The economic anxieties are not confined to the polling numbers, they are resonating deeply within the financial sector. Just 2 months after J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon famously dismissed concerns about President Trump's tariff policy with a curt "get over it," he now appears to be singing a different tune. Speaking on Wednesday, Dimon admitted uncertainty is not a good thing, acknowledging that while the average American consumer might not immediately react to tariff news, companies certainly would. This shift follows a period where the president's on-and-off tariff policy has injected considerable volatility into the stock market, with the S&P 500 still down more than 7% over the past month despite a recent rebound. Trump's imposition of sweeping 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminum imports swiftly met with retaliation from Canada and the European Union. Aims to revitalize American manufacturing, slow illegal immigration, and curb fentanyl smuggling. However, economists widely warn that such broad-based tariffs risk driving up prices across the board, from food to housing. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, echoed Dimon's concerns, stating, "The collective impact in the short run is that people are pausing their pulling back and that the economy is weakening as we speak." While Fink maintains a long-term bullish outlook on America, believing reciprocal tariffs could eventually lead to lower global tariffs, the immediate economic headwinds are undeniable. Adding another layer of complexity and uncertainty to this already turbulent environment is the recent military action in the Middle East. Investors are bracing for a potential oil price spike and rushing to safe havens following reports that the U.S. has bombed Iran's 3 nuclear enrichment facilities. This move, announced by President Trump on social media, has naturally ignited fears of wider conflict. However, some analysts like Noah Smith of Opinion suggest these worries may be overblown. Smith argues that a major war is unlikely, pointing to China and Russia's apparent lack of interest in intervening, Russia's preoccupation with Ukraine, and the limited military risk taken by Trump, especially after Israel had already neutralized much of Iran's long-range strike capability. Public opinion in the U.S. also remains strongly against a war with Iran. Nevertheless, the economic consequences, particularly concerning oil, are a significant consideration. Iran accounts for 3 to 4% of world oil production, though only about a third is exported, mostly to China. More critically, Iran has reportedly announced the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to all ships bound for Europe in response to the U.S. strikes. This narrow strait is a vital transit point for approximately one-fifth of all global oil supply, and its closure, even if temporary, would be a very big deal. While Iran's full military capability to sustain such a closure is debated, the risk of attack alone could deter civilian shipping, as evidenced by the Houthi militia's ability to disrupt shipping in the Red Sea.
Tankers are already scrambling to leave the area, highlighting the immediate disruption.
Despite these concerns, Smith posits that the U.S. itself is more insulated from oil disruption than other countries, suggesting the global economic impact might not be as dire as some predict.
As President Trump's second term progresses,
it faces a formidable array of challenges. His administration is grappling with a disillusioned public, reeling from the economic ramifications of his domestic policies while simultaneously navigating the volatile waters of international conflict that threaten global energy markets. The confluence of declining approval ratings, a weakening economy, and geopolitical instability will undoubtedly shape the narrative leading into next year's midterm elections, where Republicans already face anxious reading from state-by-state approval projections. The coming months will be a critical test of the administration's ability to manage these multifaceted crises, with the eyes of both the nation and the world fixed on how these complex dynamics will ultimately unfold. In a dramatic escalation of Middle East tensions, the United States military has launched extensive strikes against 3 Iranian nuclear facilities, an operation the Pentagon has declared a
resounding success, effectively devastating Iran's nuclear capabilities. The unprecedented offensive, dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer, represents a pivotal moment in the ongoing regional conflict, drawing sharp global reactions and setting the stage for an uncertain future. The U.S. strikes, which commenced on Saturday, June 21, 2025, targeted Iran's key nuclear sites at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, speaking at a Pentagon press conference on Sunday, asserted that Iran's nuclear ambitions were obliterated by the precision operation. "The order we received from our commander-in-chief was focused, it was powerful, and it was clear," Hegseth stated, emphasizing that the mission did not target Iranian troops or the Iranian people. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, elaborated on the tactical details, revealing that the assault involved 7 B-2 stealth bombers, marking the largest B-2 strike in U.S. history, alongside at least 1 submarine. More than 125 aircraft, including decoy flights, participated, with 75 precision-guided weapons dropped on the sites. Initial battle damage assessments indicate extremely severe damage and destruction to all 3 facilities, Kane noted, adding that the B-2s dropped 14 bunker buster bombs on Fordo and Natanz, while a submarine launched over 24 Tomahawk missiles at the Isfahan site. Crucially, U.S. forces reportedly encountered no resistance during the operation. President Donald Trump, in an address from the White House, hailed the attacks as a spectacular success, declaring that Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. He issued a stark warning to Tehran, stating Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier. While Republican congressional leaders, including House Speaker Mike Johnson, praised the president's decisive action, Democratic leaders such as Senate Intelligence Committee Vice Chairman Mark Warner voiced strong criticism, arguing that Trump had violated the Constitution by not seeking congressional authorization and risked plunging the U.S. into a wider, costly, and unnecessary conflict. Senior Democratic leadership was reportedly notified of the strike just prior to Trump's social media post announcing the operation. In Tehran, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi condemned the U.S. strikes as having everlasting consequences and accused the U.S. and Israel of blowing up diplomacy. He stated his intention to hold serious consultations with Russian President Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Despite the damage, Iran's Atomic Energy Organization maintained that the attacks would not halt its nuclear activities. Reports of massive blasts in the southern city of Bushehr, home to Iran's only nuclear reactor, further fueled regional anxieties, though the cause of these blasts remained unconfirmed. The international community reacted with a mix of condemnation and calls for de-escalation.
China's foreign ministry criticized the U.S. attacks for escalating tensions and violating the UN Charter, specifically condemning the targeting of nuclear facilities supervised by the International Atomic Energy Agency (IAEA). Russia's foreign ministry echoed these sentiments, labeling the U.S. decision irresponsible and a flagrant violation of international law. Both nations urged a return to political and diplomatic solutions. The EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas called for all sides to resume negotiations, emphasizing that a nuclear-armed Iran would pose a severe threat to international security, and announced a meeting of EU foreign ministers to discuss the situation. Regional U.S. allies like Bahrain and Kuwait, hosts to significant U.S. military bases, began preparing for potential Iranian retaliation. Though some analysts suggested Iran might spare its neighbors given the U.S. strikes originated from outside the immediate region, experts are now grappling with the profound implications of these strikes. Matthew Kronig, a seasoned analyst on the Iranian nuclear crisis, described the outcome as potentially the biggest U.S. foreign policy accomplishment since the end of the Cold War, asserting that Iran's nuclear facilities are now a smoking pile of rubble and predicting a quick de-escalation as Iran fears a major war with the U.S. However, Jonathan Panikoff cautioned that if the strikes were not completely effective, or if Iran has undisclosed sites, further military action might be necessary. He outlined two potential paths for Iran's response: a limited face-saving retaliation aimed at resuming diplomacy, or a significant attack against U.S. personnel and interests, potentially leveraging proxies and asymmetric tools, leading to a dangerous escalatory spiral. Caroline Zier reiterated the potent capabilities of the U.S. military to strike unreachable targets, but also warned that U.S. service members and diplomats in the region now face increased risk. Beyond the immediate conflict, analysts point to broader geopolitical shifts. Landon Derentz highlighted that the U.S. strikes reflect a deeper transformation in the global energy landscape, with stable markets and strong domestic production allowing the U.S. to act decisively without triggering global panic. The calculated targeting of Iran's weapons program rather than its oil infrastructure signaled both strength and restraint. Alan Pino suggested that Trump's actions send a powerful signal to Russia and China, demonstrating a willingness to use force when core U.S. interests are at stake, even as he seeks to avoid new wars. Tovia Gehring noted that China is unlikely to provide substantial aid to Iran if it concludes the regime is in an irremediable position, fearing impacts on its energy supply and economic interests, and would support sanctions if Iran resumed a dash for a bomb. John Herbst argued that the strikes strengthened Trump's position relative to Russia, potentially enabling increased pressure on Moscow regarding its aggression in Ukraine. The coming days will be critical as the world watches for Iran's next move. While the U.S. has delivered a decisive blow to Iran's nuclear program, the long-term effectiveness and the broader regional and global fallout remain to be seen. Vigorous and immediate diplomacy supported by regional partners will be essential to navigate this perilous moment and explore potential off-ramps to end the wider Israel-Iran conflict. The future of Middle East stability hinges on whether Tehran chooses a path of de-escalation and negotiation, or if the region is indeed poised for a far more dangerous and uncertain period of conflict. In a stunning pivot from ostensible diplomacy, the United States launched a massive military assault on Iran's nuclear facilities this Saturday, a move President Donald Trump had reportedly conceived days earlier, even as he publicly suggested a 2-week window for negotiations. This calculated deception, described by The Atlantic as a feint meant to keep the Iranians off guard, culminated in what the president declared were completely and totally obliterated Iranian nuclear sites, demanding Tehran abandon any remaining nuclear capability. The audacious operation, dubbed Operation Midnight Hammer by U.S. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, involved B-2 stealth bombers flying 13,000 kilometers from the U.S. state of Missouri, air refueling en route to deploy GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrator bombs. These formidable 13,600 kilograms bunker busters, designed to pierce 60 meters of concrete or rock before detonating their 2,400 kilograms warheads, struck key Iranian nuclear facilities at Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. General Kane confirmed the attack was planned and executed across multiple domains and included deception and decoy maneuvers, noting that Iranian defenses did not fly and it appears Iran's missile systems did not see us. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth further revealed the strike was the result of months and weeks of positioning and preparation executed with the highest level of operational security. While President Trump declared the strikes very successful and warned against retaliation, stating there are many targets left and that Iran must now make peace. Iranian officials quickly condemned the actions. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi accused the United States of betraying diplomacy, asserting that the attacks will have everlasting consequences and that Tehran reserves all options to defend its sovereignty, interest, and people. Just days prior, Araghchi had been in talks with European leaders, indicating Iran's readiness to consider diplomacy once again, though the sincerity of those overtures was questioned in Washington. The Iranian Red Crescent Society reported no fatalities at the nuclear sites themselves, but the broader conflict with Israel, which saw a surprise attack on Iran on June 13, has resulted in significant casualties, with Iran's health ministry reporting 430 civilians killed and over 3,500 wounded since that date. The international community's reaction has been swift and varied. China strongly condemned the U.S. attack, highlighting that Iran's nuclear facilities were under the safeguards of the UN's International Atomic Energy Agency. Beijing stated that the U.S. actions seriously violate the purposes and principles of the UN Charter and international law and have exacerbated tensions in the Middle East, urging a ceasefire and a return to dialogue. Despite the devastating strikes, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance claimed the administration still hopes to pursue a diplomatic solution, stating, "We want to talk to the Iranians about a long-term settlement here." Defense Secretary Hegseth echoed this, confirming public and private messages being delivered to the Iranians in multiple channels, giving them every opportunity to come to the table. He stressed that the scope of the attack was intentionally limited, not aimed at regime change but rather a precision operation to neutralize the threats to our national interests posed by the Iranian nuclear program. However, many experts have disputed the U.S. claims that Iran's nuclear program posed an immediate threat, with Iran consistently insisting its program is for civilian purposes. The prospects for renewed diplomacy, however, appear dim. Jonathan Panikoff, director of the Atlantic Council's Scowcroft Middle East Security Initiative, noted that President Trump's speech is more likely to be viewed by the Iranian regime as another threat rather than as an opening for diplomacy. He cautioned that Iran is unlikely to believe it can simply capitulate to the United States, and that without a face-saving off-ramp, hardliners within the Iranian regime may ultimately win the day, which could lead to a much more dangerous outcome. This sentiment is underscored by Araghchi's insistence that Iran would only return to talks once the aggression is stopped and the aggressor is held accountable for the crimes committed. This decisive military action marks a dramatic escalation in the long-standing efforts to contain Iran's nuclear ambitions, a saga spanning nearly 2 decades. The immediate aftermath sees a region on edge, with the potential for counterattacks and broader economic disruption looming large. The coming days will reveal whether this obliteration of nuclear facilities forces Iran to the negotiating table on U.S. terms, or if it merely ignites a more perilous and unpredictable phase in the volatile Middle East. The world watches, holding its breath, as the consequences of Operation Midnight Hammer begin to unfold.